You have to do a lot to get to the point where it's even ready to be listed. Generally things from the 50s and 60s are selling like crazy right now.
And so if you're talking to someone like me who really doesn't have that background and context, like how do I get started? Flipping is about spotting an opportunity to buy low and sell high. So there is this aspect of market research. Speaking of risk, what is your worst flip to date?
Just because it's vintage doesn't mean that it's cute or good or that it will sell. The most valuable thing that I've worked with are bedside, specifically matching bedside tables and dressers. People saying you shouldn't share this, you shouldn't advocate for this. Facebook Marketplace is going to be ruined forever by people who are doing this. And
for my final question, if you had one piece of advice to give to younger Kyle 3 to 4 years ago, what would you tell him?
It's a mixed bag because part of me wants to say,
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. Before we get into all of the best strategies out there for making a flipping business, we just wanted to let you know that we have an app that helps flippers grow their businesses. Our app will send you notifications whenever the items you're after are posted on Facebook Marketplace, OfferUp, or Craigslist. This way, you can always be first to buy the good deals and leave your competition in the dust. Not to mention, our app does inventory management, cross-listing, and has AI-powered scam detection. Just search Ivy Flip in the iOS App Store or the Google Play Store, or use the link in bio and try our app for 1 week completely free.
Welcome to another episode of the CouchPod. Today I'm joined by Kyle William out in Los Angeles, a vintage furniture flipper and content creator. Kyle, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Excited to talk about a process of furniture flipping.
You're out in LA right now, but you grew up in the Bay Area, and as we were talking earlier, you've been flipping furniture for about 3-4 years now, which would have meant that you started around pandemic time. So tell us about that process and that journey to where you are today.
Yeah, well, I really started being interested in furniture growing up. I would always have some kind of hand in the furniture that was like in my room growing up, or then kind of subsequently in my dorm or college apartment, paint some furniture, or sometimes I'd make it out of scrap wood, like a bench or a headboard. And then, during COVID, I started doing a lot more kind of just DIY projects in general. My mom was working on selling her house, so I made a bookshelf. I learned how to tile floor. I got really into just the nitty gritty of kind of the different elements of design and how to do it yourself, essentially. And then I think that kind of naturally translated to furniture, and I started doing that a lot more. And then I realized kind of pretty quickly I was maybe taking on too many furniture projects, and I was filling my space a little too much. So I was like, okay, I think I need to start selling some of these pieces because my home looks like a store and not a home. So I realized that I could make a decent kind of side hustle living off of just flipping furniture, finding stuff for free or for really cheap, and then spending time and effort and making them whole again or better, and being able to sell them to people who need or want that specific piece or just that specific style of furniture in general.
That's the curious thing about furniture flippers. Obviously, we deal mostly with couch flippers, but when we were looking at the industry, like side hustles, and evaluating, where should we start, we came across furniture flippers first, and we then concluded that we should probably work with couch flippers as a starting point, even though we do want to work with furniture flippers as well. And the reason being, couch flippers are purely capitalists. There's not a whole lot of repair and refurbishment that really goes into a couch. Most of the time, these guys just want to clean it and get it out the door. Whereas with furniture, there's this aspect where it's a lot more of a hobby or labor of love, or like a passion for the person that's doing it. And if they're able to convert that passion into something that is worthwhile and pays rent, right, which is kind of how we came across your series, paying rent with furniture flipping, all the more power to you. So how has that been going? Rent in LA is really expensive. How much money are you able to generate with your furniture flipping nowadays?
Yeah, it really depends. I work a full-time job, so it is fully kind of a side hustle. That was kind of a specific thing where I said, okay, I'm going to see if I could live off of this. It was more of just a test for myself. Work was kind of slow that month, and so I was, saying, maybe I could do it. And so I set out just the cost of my half of the rent, really, which was $1,400. I did manage, I think it was 5 different furniture pieces, working on them and reselling them. Some needed more work than others, but I managed to match my goal. And then kind of over time, it ebbs and flows of how much I make or how many projects I take on. More recently, I'm redoing that series right now for June. So I'm working on gathering and working on some pieces now. So there does need to be kind of intention intention behind it if I'm wanting to make kind of enough to pay rent. But if it's just a more passive thing, it's, looking on Facebook Marketplace, it's finding something someone left out on the street. It can happen a lot more just kind of naturally or at the pace that I want to take it on.
Yeah, at a certain point, it almost becomes a job. If you're concerned about paying rent, there's probably some amount of furniture that you'd be flipping anyway, or that you'd be working on anyway. Maybe that's like 1 or 2 pieces a month, given your spare time. But if you know you have to make $1,400, then that's going to go up to 5-10 pieces. So how many pieces do you have listed currently?
Currently, at the start of this new project, I just listed and sold an old vintage record player, and now I'm working on finishing up and listing a vintage dresser, coffee table, and chair. So those are kind of the projects I have coming up that are going to be listed pretty soon. But yeah, it is just, you have to do a lot to get to the point where it's even ready to be listed. It has to be finished so that it's, ready for somebody to pick up. One time I made the mistake of listing something too soon, and then somebody came to pick it up and the paint wasn't even fully dry yet. So I learned that mistake pretty early on, that it has to be ready. It has to have sat for even a week or two if there's kind of a coat or something that needs a few weeks to dry. A lot of top coats do require a week or two. So it is something you kind of have to plan in advance to get to the point where you can list it and make sure it's ready to go to a new home.
How do you decide what you want to work on? What are the average things that you're flipping?
It's always specific things I'm keeping my eye out for. It's not, it's not just kind of anything that I stumble upon. I do tend to look out for, especially when planning on reselling, it's things that have some label, some connection to designer history. If that's something that's made in Italy or a Scandinavian, Danish design, something that's mid-century modern. Generally things from the 50s and 60s are selling like crazy right now. Everyone loves the mid-century modern design. So if I can find an authentic piece from that time period, it's bound to get attention, or somebody's going to want to pay that price for it.
So it pays to know your style and design trends.
Definitely. Yeah, that's the first thing I always recommend is, one, like you said, there has to be some level of passion or interest in furniture in order to use that interest to your advantage in terms of understanding, what's popular, what would sell, and what's worth money to begin with.
What's funny is I grew up in an Asian household, right? And my parents, my mom specifically, so heavily de-emphasized the importance of art and aesthetics and fashion. She was just be good at math, kind of standard tiger mom thing. And so I grew up for a long time just believing that, everyone has their thing and you just focus on those things. But what I've come to realize as I've gotten older is that, no, actually, I am capable of sort of branching out, learning new things, even if I'm not inherently that artistic or knowledgeable about style. These are things that with enough consistent application and study, I could develop some aptitude for. That being said, my starting point when it comes to interior design is very minimal. I think the reason I know anything about interior design today is just because of the work that we've been doing in couches. And so if you're talking to someone like me who really doesn't have that background and context, how do I get started? What are the first resources that maybe I look for?
I think starting is potentially looking into just some basic research. The biggest thing, honestly, is the idea of mid-century modern furniture. That's kind of was my starting point. I knew that that's popular. So that's specifically furniture from the 50s to the 60s. It's that style that you see replicated in IKEA. It's that kind of minimalist style that people are really drawn to, especially right now as kind of homes and apartments are a lot smaller. We need kind of airier or lighter furniture, nothing too bulky or that takes up too much space. So from there, I started learning kind of the specific brands that people buy, whether they're kind of the modern brands like West Elm or things like Crate and Barrel or whatever. They have their specific modern versions. And then from there, I started learning the vintage brands that, sell Cheska and Cheska chairs or Herman Miller or Eames, those collections or brands. You start to learn a little bit more and you start to kind of learn what to look for. But also one of the tools, and I highlight it in my TikTok videos on this specific series, is just, I'm not going to know everything. I'm not going to know every furniture, but Google will. So I use the Google Photo app. It's super easy, and you just take a picture of a listing online or something you see in a vintage store, even on the street. And if it shows up with results from different kind of interior design references or websites like Cherish, which sell like high quality furniture, you can immediately get a sense of what people have paid for it or what people are trying to sell it for. So that's often my main point of reference, just from a resale point of view. If I can upload a picture, see what's comparable online, I'll immediately get a sense of value for something.
Absolutely. And the more repetition, more reps you have at it, the better you're going to get, right? At the beginning, it's sort of just, trying to take a guess at what you think is going to have resale value. But over time, you can have worked with different pieces, different styles, and you'll have actually sold these things and it'll become more like second nature.
Yeah, definitely. And what I've learned is that there often is a market for every different style. So you don't have to pigeonhole into one specific thing in order to appeal to somebody. Eventually kind of just seeing what's online, seeing what people are buying. And I do that I spend a lot of time on Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist or resale places, and I can see the higher priced items. And what I try to do is I look for those items, but maybe they need work, so they're being sold for $50 or $100 versus $600 to $1,000 sometimes.
So first and foremost, you got to know what's in style, what's trending, what there's demand for ultimately, and try to pick targets for flipping within that. Flipping is about spotting an opportunity to buy low and sell high. So there is this aspect of market research where maybe you're not sure about a piece, but it has like some defect that can be repaired. And so you can buy it for like $50 and then go turn around and sell it for $500-$600. And so those are kind of like the opportunities that you're on the lookout for.
Yeah, exactly. That is probably the most intimidating part of the process, like you mentioned, is the upfront cost. It's risky sometimes, but recently I found a coffee table that was being sold for $100, and I was like, okay, that's probably the most I've ever paid for something I was planning on reselling, because you want to make money, and $100 is already a lot for a coffee table. But I did research, it didn't need too much work, and the resale was like $1,500 to $2,000 on certain websites. So it's a gamble, but at the same time, if I get it in the right shape, if I list it on the right sites, there is a lot of potential there.
Speaking of risk, what is your worst flip to date?
Sometimes, especially with vintage pieces, just because it's vintage doesn't mean that it's cute or good or that it will sell. So I spent a lot of time on this tiered side table that was mid-century modern. It was authentic for the time, and I spent like $50 on it, which was more than I wanted to anyways, because it needed a lot of work. But I realized kind of after the fact that it was kind of ugly and nobody wanted to buy it actually. So it was one of those hard lessons of, okay, just because it is mid-century modern or just because it's kind of within the realm of what people want, that doesn't mean that everything is a diamond within that bunch. And definitely learned that the hard way. I just ended up keeping it. I don't personally like it either, but I needed a side table, so that was the only one that I've never actually sold.
That's funny. It's like when you're dating and you meet someone and they check every box, right? It's like, I don't know, whatever your requirements are, like height or wealth and education and I don't know, but there's just something off about it. And maybe it's that they're ugly. But no, I think that's a really good point to keep in mind for furniture. It's like there are oftentimes a lot of flips that we'll come across that do check these boxes. Like it's the right brand, it's the right color, it's the right price, it's the right condition. And I think this applies to couches as well. It's just like, it doesn't look that good. And so would you want this couch in your house? Or would you want this table in your house? Is a good question to ask yourself before you pick up, spend money on something. And what is the best flip that you've had?
I think there are a few pieces where, I really, I get caught up in the fact that they're very unique and that they're designer and have a really hard time letting go. Recently, I worked on this record cabinet that was just gorgeous. It was from Lane, which is this really expensive brand. This record player would, I think, retailed for like $1,000, or this record table retailed for about $1,000. And it was just beautiful. It was like this gorgeous, sleek, mid-century modern design. Didn't need too much work, but I was so close to just keeping it. And there's a lot of things that I think somebody on one of my videos once commented, like foster fail, where you take something in with the expectation to give it away, and then you keep it because you fall in love with it. I almost did that, but I fell in love with how much money I was going to get for it more, so I ended up selling it. But there are just some pieces where, just as someone who loves furniture, it's sometimes hard to have it in your hands or have it in your home and then give it away again or sell it.
Well, they say don't get high on your own supply, right? So I can see how that's a problem. But how much did you make when you flipped it?
I think I made about $500, which was great profit for something that didn't need too much work. The only thing that was wrong with it is there was a faulty mechanism on the inside where every time it opened, it would leave a big scratch on the inside. And it turned out it was just one screw was missing. But I had to remove it and repair the scratch on the inside. But, besides that, it was in great condition. So in terms of labor versus resale, it was one of the better results.
So how much time in let's say right now you're pushing, right? Because you have this challenge for June. How much time in a given week do you think you're spending on furniture flipping now?
Yeah, let's see. Right now, it really is just kind of the odd hours of the day. Because I also do content creation, I have to film when there's light out most of the time. So that does restrict when I'm actually able to work on things, especially if I have a long work day. But, I think maybe on a weekday, if I have the time, an hour or two. On the weekend, it could be kind of a full, maybe 6 hours kind of spread throughout. But that's really when I'm working on multiple pieces at the same time. Sometimes I just get carried away in the details and I don't even keep track of how much time I'm spending on it because it's something I'm enjoying. But it definitely can boil down if I'm really busy working on a few different projects, 10 to 15 hours a week.
What do you think is the most challenging aspect of being a furniture flipper and, trying to be profitable with your side hustle?
I think it really is finding pieces that don't take too much time because, some pieces I work on and they might become a black hole of time and energy and effort to the point where, even if I do resell it, kind of think, okay, if I had to break it down into cost per hour worked, maybe I'm only getting paid $5 an hour, and that's not great at all. So it really is just trying to balance how much time you actually spend on something. And I think kind of through practice and through a repetition of working on projects, they do take less and less time because I learn from mistakes. But, there have definitely been times where even though it was a successful flip, I might have spent way more time than anticipated on it.
So in a way, making money flipping furniture comes down to deal selection, making sure you're working on the right projects that have enough value in the flip, the delta between what you buy it for, what you can sell it for, how much work it's going to take, how long you're going to have to sit on it before it gets sold. And so today you find most of your deals on Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, things like that?
Yeah, I'd say 80% Facebook Marketplace, 10 to 15% from the street or just seeing something someone left out on the curb, and then maybe 5% from Craigslist. That one's harder to sift through. It's not as user-friendly, but you do get some good things every once in a while on there.
And how much time would you say you spend a given week just on sourcing, looking for deals?
Yeah, it depends. Sometimes it's just a few hours here and there. Sometimes it can get a little addicting and, checking maybe, I think for this most recent project, maybe 5 to 6 hours a week, kind of spread out over the course of over the course of the week. But part of it is you have to be pretty quick with certain things. If something pops up that is a vintage designer at a really good price, doesn't need a lot of work, sometimes something's been listed for 20 minutes and I'll send them a message saying hey, I'd love to get this. And then they tell me it's already taken. So there can sometimes be a competitive aspect where if you're not checking relatively frequently, especially if you're in the market to find something, you might lose out on something good, which I've lost out on a lot of great things.
Absolutely. Good deals move quickly. Mm-hmm. And the better the deal, the easier it is to recognize that it's a good deal. Mm-hmm. And this is the entire reason we have a business today, right? Is that we send people instant notifications whenever things are listed on Facebook, OfferUp, or Craigslist, matching their search criteria. For couch flipping, on a single sectional, people might make $600, $800 on a flip. But if that's a West Elm and it's listed for $100, it's gonna move. So yeah, I would love to, after we conclude this, I'll get you set up with the free trial and you can check out what we have to offer. What marketplaces do you typically sell on?
I'd say, again, the majority does revolve around Facebook Marketplace. If I'm trying to get kind of a higher price for it and it is maybe a more vintage piece, I have sold a few pieces on the site Cherish before. That one's tricky because it's not necessarily local. So I've lucked out where the buyers that I have found on it have been local or local enough. But the idea of I've never had to go through the process of shipping something. And I don't think I'd want to, especially something like a dresser. That sounds like a nightmare. So I do try to keep it to the local sites that do just give you people in the area that are wanting to buy something.
Makes total sense. Do you think there's a bit of a problem though when selling locally, and that person you're selling to may not understand the value of what's being sold?
Yeah, and that is, that's something that, sometimes people will very much lowball me, or they'll say, I'll give you $300 less than you're asking for this. It is unfortunate because sometimes on Facebook Marketplace or sites specific like that, people just want something cheap that's not necessarily somebody who's looking to spend $700 on a coffee table going. I personally go on it to buy my own furniture, and I would never spend more than $100 on a coffee table. So, it really is, there is a market that will spend money on Facebook Marketplace and will spend more money on Facebook Marketplace, but there are also people like me on there who would see a $700 coffee table and scroll right past. So it is really, sometimes it's patience, sometimes it's waiting for it to find the right person. And yeah, sometimes it is having to take that extra step of listing it on a site that's specifically for the resale of the items I'm selling.
Right. And maybe a marketplace like Cherish or First Dibs, and the average buyer is a little bit more savvy to the value of things. On Facebook, you get everyone. It's like you, me, my mom, my dad, and who knows what they think the value of something is, right? May not be commensurate with the market. If I'm just starting out, like I'm interested in DIY, I want to do a couple flips, what are the absolute essentials for me to get started, like in terms of tools and like material?
Yeah, the main tools, I think the first thing I started with was specifically citrus strip, or just any kind of stripping agent, so that you can put that specifically on like wood furniture to take away any paint, because sometimes someone will paint something like a turquoise and, underneath is like gorgeous mahogany wood, and you need to get to that wood. So, that's oftentimes the safest way to do it, so you're not kind of scraping or sanding up paint, and it can be a pretty quick process too. The next thing is I specifically work with wood pieces. I try my best to find pieces that are solid wood, because that way if there's damage you can sand them and smooth them out. So the other thing is a sander. I do just have a palm sander, pretty cheap at like a Home Depot or a Lowe's, and you need kind of the different grits of sandpaper, and that's something you can kind of do research on to find the right thing. But, those are the two kind of main essentials of getting a project started. And then there's some more kind of creative freedom of if you want to stain something, if you want to leave it as is. And, that's the more kind of minutia, but, really just kind of dealing with getting it prepared is, I think, the most important step.
I think there are kind of two camps that I've seen in furniture flipping, where you have one where they're trying to sort of restore or achieve the natural essence of the piece. And there's another approach where it's a more creative process, and they're trying to transform the piece that they're working on. And it's more in the realm of like artistry, I would say, than restoration. What camp do you feel like you fall in? Does it change over time?
Yeah, I think it does depend on the piece. I feel like more generally, because I try to work with antiques or vintage pieces, restoration is more the name of the game in terms of getting it to the shape or the aesthetic that the piece was made for, just because that's the intention, or that's the specific style that people who would buy those pieces would look for. So a lot of the times it is kind of stripping away paint that probably looked great in their space, but most people want kind of what the original furniture's intent was. Occasionally I do find a piece that is very damaged, kind of damaged to the point where it can't be restored, and that's where I'm able to maybe bring in more of a creative process of I can paint it, or I can add something else to it to get it to a state where it is functional and looks good again. So it starts with restoration and sometimes ends up having to be more creative when that's not possible.
Absolutely. So it sounds like at the very basic level, something to strip away paint, maybe like sand down the wood, right, is what you talked about. Then there might be a series of basic repairs that you have to perform, like a broken shelf or, something like that. I mean, maybe you could talk a little bit more about that. What are some common repairs that you might make other than sort of like refinishing the wood?
Sometimes it's hardware, sometimes it's having to replace some screws, sometimes it's having, a lot of cleaning of the hardware. If it's old, I generally just do like a white vinegar bath. So you just put all of the rusty hardware or anything that needs cleaned, soak it in vinegar for a while, not too long. Every piece is a little different, but that will kind of get all of the dirt off, and it'll make it a lot easier to shine and polish. And that's one of my favorite parts of the process, is that kind of working with the smaller hardware and shining it and bringing that back to life. And then the other pieces are, sometimes there's scrapes or damages. So wood filler is my best friend in those situations. And, sometimes I do end up, and this is where kind of the artistry and the restoration comes together, is sometimes if there's like a big scrape or a big piece missing, I'll have to use wood filler and then kind of paint to match the wood grain or whatever design is present. And so sometimes that's the most tedious part, is trying to get it to look like there was never a repair to begin with.
Absolutely. And I've seen some of your content and some content generally. Just watching this repair and refurbishment process is very relaxing in a way. I could watch it all day long. Now, when it comes to like deal selection, as we were talking about, are there things that you prioritize? You really like this type of dresser, these kinds of tables? Like, what should our viewers be on the lookout for if they, how do you spot a good deal?
I think that when I started out specifically, I started with chairs, which is armchairs, dining chairs, reading chairs, whatever it is. I think that they're the easiest things to start with. Sometimes they're pretty complicated, actually. Like, I've had to recane a chair before, which, I had to learn how to do that. And when I have to learn how to do a whole new skill, YouTube's great for that. But, really kind of small things, bedside tables, chairs, that's for somebody who maybe doesn't have a lot of space, doesn't have a lot of experience. Getting to practice on those things, they're also much easier for people to come and pick up if they have a smaller car, or even if they're taking it on public transit or whatever it is. That it's just a lot more accessible on both sides. So I think my first maybe 10 projects were all just different versions of chairs.
That's great. Chairs maybe are the training wheels of furniture flipping.
Yeah, because ultimately there's not a lot there. If there is wood to be sanded, you can hand sand everything. If you need to stain it, takes all of a minute or two to cover it. Even if you need to refurbish it, which I've done before, pretty simple. If there's just a cushion, it's just taking the old fabric off and stapling on new fabric. It is a lot of the basic skills you could learn. If you need to paint something, how to do that. I never even put that together. But my training wheels for the longest time was just kind of working and figuring out how to do things kind of on the basics of working with chairs.
That's probably a great place for people to get started. But as they start to advance in their furniture flipping hustle, what are the more valuable and profitable pieces that they could be working on?
I think the most valuable thing that I've worked with are bedside, specifically matching bedside tables and dressers. I think people will spend a lot of money on a really solid, great dresser that will last them a long time, or, something to put in the bedroom. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time in the bedroom. Obviously, there's a lot of attention put into, how a bedroom feels or how they want it to feel. And, so I think those are specifically dressers are where, I see in my own work, but also I see in a lot of other furniture flippers' works online, that being kind of the best point of profit. I'd say maybe coffee tables are in the middle ground as well. Everyone needs and wants a good solid coffee table. And, if you could find something that is either vintage or antique, people are willing to spend a lot on it.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot of useful tips for someone starting out, how to get off the ground with their furniture flipping hustle. Now I'd like to turn the conversation to your story a little bit. So you started out during the pandemic. How do you think furniture flipping has changed, since the pandemic?
Yeah, I think that the main thing is probably a lot more people have gotten into it. I think, like I mentioned earlier, the idea of competition, for a good deal or a good piece is a lot more apparent than maybe it was in the past. I remember showing up to like a restaurant that was closing down during COVID, and they were giving away their chairs for free, and there was barely anyone there. And then kind of recently I went to a kind of a warehouse closing sale where they were giving away a lot of stuff for free, and it was like a madhouse trying to get through there, and I ended up just leaving empty-handed. So, I think the idea that you can make money off of reselling furniture is a very appealing, and I think a lot more people are dabbling or getting into it, which I think is a great thing, obviously, because I do it and I advocate for it, but it does come at the cost of some slight competition every once in a while.
Yeah, there are a lot of mixed feelings on that, especially in couch flipping. Couch flipping for such a long time was not very well known. And even today, there may be a couple hundred to a couple thousand people flipping couches out in the United States, which is not a whole lot compared to furniture flipping. There are way, way, way more furniture flippers by our estimate. And so, we've gotten a lot of flack as a company because, we create content and we try to advertise our services, et cetera. And they're like, oh, you're getting more couch flippers into the game and yada, yada, yada. And I imagine you may have faced some similar criticism as someone who's flipping furniture and also creating content. So tell me about that.
Yeah, I do get comments sometimes of, people saying you shouldn't share this, you shouldn't advocate for this, Facebook Marketplace is going to be ruined forever by people who are doing this. And, I think that maybe some people will get into it or be inspired by my content. I think that's a great thing, but I also do think that there is a commitment to it, that it's not just it's something anyone can pick up, but it's not something anyone can do kind of in the long haul. There is a commitment. There is going to have to be some desire or drive, just like any job, any side hustle, any part-time job. There is a certain level of commitment that has to go into it that I think not everyone is going to get into.
And how did the content creation come about? Where along in the process where you're like, I want to, kind of record this and share with the world?
Well, I went to school for film, so I think I kind of naturally am inclined to film things, and I kind of have the skills of knowing kind of what a good shot is, how to edit things. So I think it kind of started pretty naturally of, I'm just going to do this. It started out just kind of for fun and also kind of as a motivator. If I knew that I was filming a process, it would help me get it finished because I had a problem of having pieces that would lay around that would never get done. So it really did start mainly as a motivator just to get things out and, share them with friends. And over time, it became, a lot more than just my close circle. But, I think that the motivation piece still works a lot for me, just to know that I plan to post, so I need to get the project done.
Where do you hope to get with the content side of things? Like, what's the plan there?
I've thought about that from time to time. I haven't necessarily had any direct goals with it specifically. I do, appreciate just the feedback and the community I get from posting and from sharing things, and part of that is really nice. I would love for it to one day translate to, in-person things, whether that's working with a community in person to work on furniture together, or if it means kind of opening my own stand in a flea market, or, whatever it is, just being able to work towards maybe being able to utilize it to do this full time, which, like I said, I currently have a full-time job on top of doing this. So, I think eventually knowing that I have in the past met my goal of being able to pay rent and stuff like that with it, that, being able to utilize that platform and those connections to just do more to make it more sustainable, I think.
Absolutely. You want to see it continue to grow. So that's like a goal in the abstract, but you don't have any like concrete goals around that because you'd rather just sort of let things take place organically and just kind of see how it goes. And if the opportunities are there, they'll present themselves and you'll kind of know at that point. It's interesting what you're saying about community. What sort of community do you feel like is growing around your content and the pieces that you're putting out?
Honestly, my either like hate comments or suggestion comments are where I learn a lot in my process. Like if anyone wants to learn how to do things correctly, just go through the comments on my videos and there'll be, 100 people that will give a suggestion, tell me I'm doing something wrong. And first I was a little upset when I got comments like that, but now I actually utilize them and I do some research when somebody comments something, and I learn a lot and I grow a lot in my own kind of experience by putting things out and getting feedback. Sometimes it's positive feedback, sometimes, like I said, it's negative feedback, but regardless, the feedback I get helps me learn and kind of pushes me forward and inspires me to do new projects.
Amazing. And for my final question, if you had one piece of advice to give to younger Kyle, younger Kyle starting out in his furniture flipping journey 3 to 4 years ago, what would you tell him?
It's a mixed bag because part of me wants to say, do a little more research or be a little bit more prepared going into it, because I made a lot of mistakes along the way, but I also think I grew from those mistakes. So in that way, I'm glad that I had some projects that failed, or that I used the wrong material or the wrong oil stain or versus water stain or whatever it is. Yeah, I think at the same time it would have saved me time and hassle in the end. I'm someone who just likes to do things and then learn, but every once in a while I think, wow, I wish that maybe I just Googled something beforehand, and that I've actually gotten more in the habit of doing that now as I'm working with like increasingly more expensive or more antique pieces. So I think maybe patience is the thing, not jumping directly into something.
I see. It's funny because a lot of the time people have the opposite problem, and the advice would be something like, don't be afraid of failure. And in your case, maybe it's like, well, maybe you should be a little bit more afraid of failure.
Yeah. I think that would be helpful sometimes. I get very excited. I mean, this is something that I'm willing to dedicate hours to outside of, a full-time job, is because it's something that does excite me. So sometimes when I have the extra hour, I'll jump into something before maybe giving too much thought to it. So patience, because it is a process that sometimes requires it.
Amazing. Well, sometimes practice makes perfect. In other cases, patience can make perfect. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us on the CouchPod. If our audience or any viewers wanted to follow along with you on your journey, how can they get in touch?
Yeah, it's Kyle William Art across all the platforms. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube now. So, and I post on all of them consistently. So whichever you use the most, feel free to find me on there.
Amazing. We'll make sure that there's a link to all of your social profiles in the description of this video below.